Hello everybody, welcome back to Screenstars. I'm here today to bring you my review for the 2023 horror film Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. The film is co-written and directed by Reese Frake Waterfield, and it stars Chris Cordell, Amber Doing-Thorne, Craig Devitt Dorset, Simon Ellis, Mark Haldor, May Kelly, and a whole host of other faces you will likely recognise if you are used to watching Scott Jeffrey films. Yes, guys, this is a Scott Jeffrey produced film. Now, the difference with this film compared to other Scott Jeffrey produced films is this film, when it was announced, caught the imagination of the internet and kind of went viral a little bit. People were kind of like, well, how can they make a horror film based on Winnie the Pooh? That's just not right. They'll get sued and all this kind of stuff. Well, no, they won't, because the name of Winnie the Pooh kind of has gone into the public domain. Similar to Amityville and other things like that are in the public domain, and Dracula and other things. People could just make whatever they want about those characters. So that's why they kind of jumped first, if you like. Scott Jeffrey and his production company jumped on this one first, and it was a good decision because it really built quite a lot of hype for this film. The film itself, I think has been highly anticipated for quite some time, certainly by the horror community, and certainly for everybody else who've got a little bit of a morbid curiosity about what on earth is this film going to be like. Well, I shall explain. The film actually does focus on Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Eeyore and Piglet, and it tells the story of how Christopher Robin befriended these friendly creatures when he was a boy. They became best friends. However, it turns dark then, because Christopher Robin inevitably grew up and he had to move away and get his education and start a life. So essentially he abandoned Winnie and Piglet and the rest of them to fend for themselves, which they didn't appreciate at all. In actual fact, it turned them feral, and turned them into very, very bitter and twisted creatures, and creatures that despise humans now. So we kind of start the film with Christopher Robin with his wife-to-be turning up at 100 Acre Wood to introduce her to Winnie and his friends, who she thinks is mad, basically, that they can't exist. However, they discover the truth that in actual fact they do exist. They've gone feral, and Winnie the Pooh is not happy to see Christopher Robin. And then the film switches to a group of young ladies, the usual thing. They're staying at a, mansion-y type place, living it up, having hot tubs, all the stuff that young girls get up to. And guess what? Winnie and Piglet discover them and decide that they're next, basically. Right, okay. What are my thoughts on Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey? Well, if you've seen me do reviews on Scott Jeffrey films before, they're kind of three levels to them, really. There's some where there's a little bit more effort put into, but they barely get above a 5 out of 10. There's others that are truly terrible, if you like, and not very good at all, and they're like right down the scale, hard to watch sometimes. And then there's other ones that are so bad it's good, and I have genuinely enjoyed a handful of Scott Jeffrey films because they don't take themselves too seriously, and they are genuinely entertaining because of it. This has a little bit of a different feel to it for a Scott Jeffrey produced film. I think it's clear that when they realised that this was gaining popularity and it was gaining a lot of attention on the internet and online, all this kind of stuff, I think they realised we can't just, do a hack job at this. We can't just film this over a weekend as they normally would, and just with terrible effects, terrible acting, and a really terrible story, all that kind of stuff. So they've gone back to it, clearly, and tried to add in some higher production values here and there. And it does show occasionally. Normally, Scott Jeffrey produced films, the effects are terrible, the writing's most things are pretty terrible. Now, I'm not saying this is a good film, because essentially it isn't. It's not as good as it could have been. But for a Scott Jeffrey film, there are some things here to enjoy. And there is, I think, a genuine attempt here to make something of better quality than usual. Does it all work? No, it doesn't. I think it had a strong opening. We're introduced at the beginning to a nice animated thing, explaining who Winnie was and Christopher Robin was, all this kind of stuff. Then you get that nice thing at the beginning with Christopher Robin as an adult going back to see Winnie and Piglet, etc. And I thought that was a really strong opening, and I wanted the film then to focus on Christopher Robin, focus on that story. But no, it goes down that old chestnut and that old horror trope of bunch of girls in a house getting stalked by, voiceless antagonists a la Jason and Michael Myers. And that's all this film becomes. It becomes a generic slasher film just with an interesting theme, a Winnie the Pooh theme. And I do honestly think they missed the trick with this one. I think if they'd have put a bit more time and effort into this, fleshed out the characters more to make them interesting. The only interesting one was Christopher Robin. The rest of them, I couldn't tell you the name if I tried. They tried to make you care for them because they gave one of the girls a backstory of being stalked by some guy, which is, again, an overused trope in a horror film to give the so-called final girl or whatever something that you're going to root for. But it's overused, and it's overused in Scott Jeffrey films, and I couldn't care less. I couldn't have cared less about her or the rest of the girls in that house. I wanted to know more about Christopher Robin and what went wrong with Winnie the Pooh, Piglet, and the rest of them. It focused on that far too briefly for me, which I thought was a real shame. I did think there was potential here. There was some pretty decent gore and violence in the film. They've definitely ramped that up for sure. And, there are some genuinely creepy moments and here and there in the film. I just think, if they'd have brought a bit more quality to the film, I think it would have absolutely elevated it. And this could have been the film that broke them through, maybe this, Scott Jeffrey and his films. Unfortunately, I think ultimately it failed to hit the mark. I wasn't convinced either with the effects. I thought they were okay, but at times it just looked like a guy wearing a Winnie the Pooh mask. And then at other times they tried to make a genuine attempt to make it look like it was like a real creature, I suppose. I think Piglet looked more effective than Winnie the Pooh. But do I think this film's a failure? No, I don't. I think it's a step in the right direction for Scott Jeffrey. I think they could have made this so much better. I think if they just, put the bad habits away that they've used on the cheaper films and really went for it on this one and put a little bit more effort and budget into this, and I think it probably could have brought them through because the concept is there. It's a fascinating idea, very strong opening. After the first 20 minutes or so, it just kind of becomes, like I say, a generic slasher film with Winnie the Pooh and Piglet doing the slashing, I suppose. But yeah, see what you think of it. If you're intrigued on watching it, especially if you're a fan of the Scott Jeffrey low budget produced films, I was genuinely a little bit disappointed with it. You know what I mean? There's too much wrong with it, and I could go into town on where the plot is weak. You could kind of pull it apart here, there, and everywhere, but it just didn't work. And there's other things as well. They did at times try to focus on Winnie the Pooh being like a tortured bear, being abandoned by Christopher Robin, and then they just dropped that storyline pretty much. Just like, that's what we want to see. Focus on that. But no, it kind of just picks up its bad habits from its previous films, unfortunately. But yeah, anyway, I'm going on a bit, but see what you think of the film if you want to check it out. And of course, don't forget to check back on the channel for lots more reviews.